Hi, my name is Sophie.
Hi, I'm Minerva, and this is our recording for our book project on Hijab, Butch Blues by Lamia H.
So this book is basically a coming-of-age memoir by Lamia, who is a queer Muslim, and it explores the intersectionality of their identity, their religion, and their gender. Throughout it, she navigates the troubles of living as a queer person in an Arab country, and then eventually grows to have to deal with being a Muslim in the United States. Throughout the book, they parallel their queerness to their faith in many different ways, providing analogies and metaphors to stories from the Quran. And they explain these concepts of Islamic faith to people who wouldn't really have a background in it. And so they provide a lot of interesting insight.
Yeah. So to move on to how it fits into our class discussion portion, I think that this is an extremely important book, and that there are many ways in which it, many different things that we've discussed that it can fit into. One of the things that we've thought about is indigenous and historical concepts of queerness, because one thing that Lamia does throughout the book, every chapter has the name of something related to Islamic culture or the Quran, and a lot of those are Lamia seeing queerness in Islam, in the Quran. One of those things is the character of Maryam, who closely parallels the character of Mary, the Virgin Mother of Jesus in Christianity, and in how she, how exactly do you see Maryam as, or how do you see that she sees Maryam as queer?
So throughout the memoir, she describes Maryam in her Muslim history class as a young student, where she learns about her. And she learns about how Maryam was a virgin who was informed by an angel that they were going to have a child. And Lamia's interpretation of Maryam is that she didn't want to have relations with a man, and sees her as sort of a lesbian or someone who is attracted to women rather than men.
Yeah, and particularly there's a point where she flees into the desert, and a humanoid angel who's a very attractive man comes down to tempt her, and Lamia sees that, and as a child she's not experiencing attraction to guys. She has this crush on one of her teachers. She's she asks openly hey, Quran teacher, is Maryam a lesbian? And of course that's met with laughter and such. But yeah, and scholars of the Quran don't think that Maryam was a lesbian, but nonetheless, it's where Lamia grew up in a rich Arab country. There wasn't particularly stories of queer people and such. Not easily viewable queer representation. So even this character, Maryam, who's not even queer, just seeing that she does something that looks like what a lesbian might do, just kind of opens her up to this is what a lesbian looks like. Just opens up the idea of you can reject men, you know?
Mm-hmm. The other big example of the historical concept of queerness comes in her depiction of the Islamic god Allah, and how she interprets Allah as being genderless, or not having any defining primary sex characteristics.
Yeah.
And sees them as non-binary or transcending gender.
Right.
And talks a lot about that, just referring to their God as they throughout the Quran and whatnot.
Yeah, and traditionally, the the Islamic god is referred to, using like royal we and like but also traditionally like masculine gendered language, and Lamia like makes this point of like there's kind of like some patriarchy going on there, because it's seen that referring to the Islamic god as a woman is kind of referring to them as a weak. And I think this also kind of fits into her concept of indigiqueerness, in that she's kind of making her own queerness out of Islam, out of Islamic culture, where it can be very hard to find. Of course, she does eventually find community with other queer Muslims, but I think there's some process of inventing that happens, which she doesn't call being indigiqueer, but that I think is very similar to being indigiqueer. And I think that leads us, or do you have anything to say about that?
That leads us into the intersections that she talks about. Do you want to start with that?
So I think we've already been discussing how she intersects queerness with her faith, how Lamia can kind of see queerness in Islam, sees queerness in relation to her practice of Islam. And she also has to deal throughout the book of worrying about that someone would out them to their mosque, and just about some of their friends that they've made in Islamic communities or in mosques, if they're going to be homophobic when she comes out to them. And some of them are extremely accepting, and she just has to deal with that intersection of faith and queerness. Do you want to touch on the second point?
So the next point, talking about this, is how Lamia builds community through both her religion and her queerness, and starts to find individuals that she can relate with, and starts finding an in-group that shares similar interpretations, which kind of relates to our class.
I think we've talked a lot in our class about just building community with other people, kind of making our own queer spaces, and just being able to support people who are disadvantaged because of societal oppressions, because of hegemony, and Lamia definitely finds that. There's several people who she meets through these communities that help her out significantly with staying in the United States, eventually becoming a citizen after grad school, and if we want to move on to our final point.
We want to talk about why this book is rather contentious or banned. It's definitely not as contentious as a book like Genderqueer, which has explicit sexual denotations and images throughout it, but it still has a lot of controversial points in how it interprets religion and also how it informs a religion. Just a lot of traditionalists in the West don't want you to think about other religions, and that's one way people go after this book. Another way is just because of the fact that it has such radical interpretations of Islam, which in the West tend to be viewed as a more traditionalist religion with hard rules and hard interpretations.
Or even those within Islam who really dislike these radical interpretations. And I think some of the parallels that Lamia draws are really very easy to see in the Quran, how they parallel their own community building with the community building that Muhammad does in the very beginning of Islam, with how Moses builds community in Egypt while under the oppressive rule of Pharaoh. But definitely stuff like seeing Miriam as a lesbian is more controversial.
Mm-hmm. Overall, Minerva and I think this is a really interesting book that we've read that provided us with a perspective that we don't really get in our Western education of the world, and we'd strongly recommend you guys check it out.
Yeah, this was an amazing book. I really recommend it. And I think so many, there's just so many queer people who, and Lamia touches on this in the book, who just think that Islam is diametrically opposed to being queer. And yeah, there's a reason why Lamia is concerned about being outed to her mosque and such. But there's so many queer Muslims out there. There's so many non-binary Muslims that it's just very closed-minded. And this book is very open to people who know nothing about Islam to be educated on what it's like to live as a queer Muslim and how to reconcile those things.
Alrighty. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.